soften the image and so on and so forth.
Sure. So my involvement was, or has been, producing the forward for the heritage piece. And it was interesting because Jane asked me to do it and I was just like, sure. And then I read the different contributions and I just went through such a range of emotions. Really getting kind of people talking about their journeys, spaces of resistance, experiences of oppression, ways that people were defining need. I was really struck by how little we talk about aspiration. And in my office today we were talking about aspiration and two of the young women said to me, you know, we're not that keen on that word because David Cameron's claimed it. And it sent me somewhere else in my head. But I then, you know, I thought about how difficult it is for us to imagine a world free of homophobia. How difficult it is. So what we do is we too often relate to ourselves as social problems because that's how we've been defined. And so it was, for all intents and purposes, it was a really short piece, but it took me ages to write because I found myself hit by all those emotions and I knew that I was putting something of myself in there that very often doesn't make it into pieces of writing outside personal writing. And so it's quite important and I felt really privileged to be doing the piece. I was also struck by how many stories remain untold, how there are activists that we've lost along the way, in terms of people just being burnt out, really, really tired, really fed up, just being in that space of we can't do it anymore, and we don't hear those voices anymore, but also how very few spaces we have to help to heal those broken hearts, because actually when you're doing equalities-based work, the personal is the political. It's not this thing that you switch off when you go home. And it's raw and challenging and sometimes really distressing, as well as full of amazing highs, and if you're fortunate, you know. And for me, sometimes in my work, I experience these just wonderful highs, but there is something about us being able to break it down a bit where we do a little bit of healing within this work. Not as some fluffy, airy-fairy thing, but creating spaces where people can experience being held. And so in reading through each piece, that I suppose those were the sounds that kept coming through to me. The need to create spaces like this where people experience space, where you're allowed to talk about need as defined by self, but you're also allowed, you're given permission, you're supported in creating vision and going, well, what would it be like if, took the lid off, what would it be like? And when we speak of us, who are we speaking of? Is it us, or is it your experience as a man versus my experience as a woman? You know, how are we being represented? So it's a short but complex and really raw piece as well, is what I say. That was a very long answer, wasn't it? It came from my heart.
I think that art does have to come from that place, because then I'm not sure if you know it's fakes and that stuff. It's going to come from that place that's quite visceral, quite real. It's actually your emotions are there. They're just there. I think for me, I'm part of the creative process is about saying this is what I feel and think, knowing that people then could then misuse that and abuse that as well. But then I think for me, kind of, marrying photography and socially based issues, that passion just keeps me kind of coming back. And then the times that I feel, you know, I've had enough, can't be bothered, can't be asked or whatever, photography or that thing has caused me back in another kind of way, and you go, okay, and then bypass all the crap that comes with this work. It is actually, equality's work is not easy.
No.
I think they wanted to be creative and then to be quality work. Why would you want to do that?
Absolutely.
Why would they do that?
Absolutely.
So hence, I think for me, kind of, I kind of think then the work, I think the beauty of the work and the almanac is then contributes to the heritage and history here, and the best way, I think for me, kind of, I think that we always have to kind of document and tell our stories constantly over and over and over again. Even if people have heard those stories, we still have to kind of tell those stories, create those images, and also those images will then be read in a different way in this particular moment, and then in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, those very same images will then be read very differently. And especially, I think that it's kind of how do we kind of constantly capture this moment that we're in through kind of whatever kind of creative kind of art form, and that means whether it's photography or dance or poetry or writing or whatever. And because basically, I think too often people talk for us.
Yes.
And kind of too often people kind of create images and they think, well, actually, you should look like this. And also, actually, it's the other way around. This is how I see us. I see myself.
And the other piece of that is, it's people create images for us, but there's another piece of it, which is even in the sector, this thing called the voluntary sector, this thing where, for all intents and purposes, we're working our activism.
Yeah.
What we've got is we've got this hierarchy where certain activism is more important than others. Certain activism is validated by resources, by actually if you speak to. So if, for example, you know, if I think about in my specific area of work, it's much easier to say to people, we would like money to, and even then they don't want to give it to you, but we would like money that's specifically around black women and the problems they're facing, as opposed to black women and the vision that they might have. And so then your activism then immediately is always associated with the need, with the experience of oppression.
Yeah.
And we then, within the sector, recreate those hierarchies, because there are ways that we go, those organisations are doing the thing because they're speaking that particular language. And for those activists who couldn't or didn't want to, so many of those people are the people that we've lost along the way, whose voices we no longer hear. And when I was writing that, actually I could hear you in my ear about the need to document our journeys, and the need for us to document our journeys, the need for us to speak our stories, the need for us to actually speak with our own voices, and for us to realise that